All right, another podcast from the Michigan Institute of Athletics in Brighton, Michigan. It's going to be a great podcast today. I've been looking forward to this one. Right before we get into it, I want to shout out VetLife. VetLife is a 501c3 nonprofit company. It's a company of veterans for veterans. Every veteran faces struggles when they try to transition from active duty back to normal civilian life, and VetLife is there to ease that transition. The best ways to reach out to VetLife is through Instagram or Facebook, or just check out their website at vetlifetoday.org. So let's get right into it. I'm joined today by Stephen Mason. Stephen, for the people that don't know you, let's talk a little bit about your background. Were you born and raised here in Michigan? And let's start to create your story.
Cool. Yep. I was born and raised in Hamburg, just south of Brighton, Michigan, basically. Grew up with my brother Eric, who's 11 months younger than me, and my parents. And been here my whole life. I moved around a lot. I've had a pretty crazy young adult life and lived in Detroit and Inkster, and basically because it was cheap to live out there, and I lived a pretty crazy young adult life. But as I grew and started kind of growing my own family, moved back here, and it's a good place to have a family and raise kids. So
100%. I want to dig into this a little bit because even before the podcast, you were telling me some stuff that I didn't know that blew me away. I was like, that is interesting. Like you said, when you were living in Inkster, you were basically just in an enclosed porch that you had built, that you were paying $100 a month for rent. How did that come to be? Were you an adult at this point? Were you still in school? What was your young childhood life like?
Yeah, so growing up pretty, I guess, typical childhood. I know we'll get into it later, but I was diagnosed with Asperger syndrome when I was 8, and so that's something that, kind of shaped my early life and childhood. But other than that, pretty kind of typical upbringing, played sports and stuff, and grew up as a kid. When I was in high school, 15, 16 years old, I got into kind of subculture music. Like I always was just generally liked music as a whole. And then when I was getting into high school, started getting into like punk and metal and hardcore music and stuff like that, and so became more important as a part of my life.
Who were some of the bands that were really influential to you at the time?
So I had a funny journey because when middle school I was into fruit booting, so like aggressive inline skating. So like not skateboarding because I was never coordinated enough for that, but I liked rollerblading. So I do tricks and stuff like that. So doing that, I was into just like typical middle school punk rock at the time. So like, Simple Plan and Blink-182 and a little bit more of the metal stuff, and all classic metal. Black Sabbath's been one of my favorite bands forever. But then in high school, I got really into going to local shows. So like my heroes were the guys who would headline the, Heartland Performing Arts Center and the Howell Opera House. So those type of bands, the Vanity Farewell and Our Endeavor became Endeavors, Tiger, some of these, local heroes. A lot of them went on to do actually really cool things in music, but those were like my entryway. And then, at the time, the big aggressive music was metalcore, so The Devil Wears Prada and A Day to Remember and those type of bands. But then I got real deep into looking back at like classic hardcore, Minor Threat and Black Flag and those type of bands, and wide variety. Got real into the modern hardcore scene at the time. So got into that kind of subculture music. It was a way for me. I was kind of, I guess, a little bit of an outcast in school. Again, the Asperger stuff wasn't really too socially competent. So subculture and that kind of music was a way for me to escape and kind of like make myself weird on purpose. So instead of being like the weird kid, because I'd be unaware of social cues and I'd pick my nose and eat it in class and then get picked on or beat up for that, it was like, oh no, I'm choosing this alternative path. So I was kind of into that. And then when I was 16, I'm like a dive right in, all or nothing type guy, as we were talking about before. If I'm remodeling my house, I'm looking up electrical schematics, figuring out how to rewire light switches, and doing everything for myself. So natural progression from being into that kind of music was starting to play it. So I didn't really have any musical talent or skill or training, so I became a singer. So I was the singer. I started out in high school playing in a metalcore, deathcore band. So real goofy.
What was the name?
So Heir to the Throne was the real tough band.
I like it.
Swoopy
Heir to the Throne.
I started getting tattooed when I was like 16, and I got a big giant cross on my side because we were like kind of like a Christian metalcore band, because that was like the hot stuff then. So I was kind of following that trend a little bit. And then I was in that band through high school, graduated high school. With the subculture stuff, I got really into just art in general. I was always really into like video editing and audio production and graphic design. I was real nerdy, so I loved like Apple computers and Mac operating systems, real good for that type of creative stuff. So I got into that. Actually, the 242 church down the street here was very super small at the time, and I was involved in that church and started doing graphic design and video production there. Took a lot of art classes in school, and I got into the College for Creative Studies, which is a private art school based in Detroit. It's ranked as the second most prestigious art school in the country. So it's real high end. Most people, it's like a hidden gem in Detroit. They're actually the world leader in automotive design. So people send their kids from all over the world. A lot of Asian countries and things like that come to participate in the automotive design program, and then all the top automakers hire from there. So I was in the graphic designer advertising program. Right after high school, went in there. I got some scholarships. Tuition was $40,000 a year, and I had about a 3/4 scholarship. So it was something I was into. But then I continued playing in bands through college and on and off, and then kind of got a little serious with one right after my first year of college called Dead and Gone. And we had a lot of fun. That was the first one. We were old enough that we could start networking. Tumblr was real big at the time, so we would network and started going on these small Midwest tours, and then further out on the East Coast, and networking with some record labels and putting out music. So I did all of that for
wait, you can't skip by that, because for the average person, we will never know what that's like. Like, I wouldn't know what it was like to be touring across the country, even if in smaller venues, with a band and meeting people in all these different, super small culture shocks. Like, now you're down south, now you're over here, now you're over here. What was that like, man? Talk a little bit about that point of your life. What life lessons did you pick up from there? You probably made some awesome connections. You probably learned social skills as a kid that, might have struggled with social cues earlier on. Now you're meeting this diverse group of people with all different belief systems and ages and, across the country. Talk a little bit about that. You can't skip by that.
It's funny because that's a part of my life and a part of my past that I just take for granted. And I guess you're right. I never even thought that sounds impressive or cool to somebody. Because to me, it was just what I did. And my level of success was so small compared to the grand scheme of music and entertainment, and even just like in the hardcore world, like we didn't do anything that'll be remembered in 20 years or whatever, but it was to me, it was like the most important thing in the world at the time when I was doing it. And we had crazy stories because it was super DIY and punk, and it was like borrow a van from a buddy's band that's a little bit more serious, who had like an old junky 350 Transit van that barely worked, and go on these tours. We were all self-booked. We didn't have a booking agent or anything, so we would just send messages to other local smaller bands all across the country through Tumblr, or MySpace was dying, and Facebook, and find them, say, hey, can you guys put together a show? Shows would be in bars, basements, VFW halls. We had one venue get canceled, so then literally at the show, people are like, yeah, they're not letting us play. I don't know why, what happened. I don't even remember. It was in Dayton, Ohio, and like people are like texting their friends, hey, who has a basement we can play in? Who has a driveway we can play in? So we're just hanging out outside this bar in Dayton. Someone's like, oh, yeah, we can do it in my parents' driveway. It's 20 minutes away. Everyone loaded all the bands. There was 2 touring bands, like 4 local acts, and we load up to this drive. We had about 250 people there. Playing, like, I have pictures of it, of us playing like under a swing set in this guy's backyard, and then there's kids moshing in the driveway and jumping off basketball hoops. And every night it would be like, we didn't have money because our guarantee was like $100 or something, and that's split 5 ways, put gas in the van, sell our DIY shirts. And so hotels were like, at the end of our set, hey, who's got a floor we could crash on, and we'll give you some tapes and some shirts, and if you buy us a hot and ready, that'd be awesome type thing. So it was adventurous.
Wow. I mean, truly, what a life experience. I mean, yeah, you look back and go, hey, that was just my my life at that time, but that's incredible. I mean, most people will never understand what you go through like that. I mean, it's just a cool experience. Life is supposed to be an adventure, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of the times life isn't an adventure for most people. You're showing up in someone's driveway and there's a swing set and you're out there crushing your music. That's wicked, man. I mean, there's just a lot of passion behind movements like that. You know what I mean? And I love passion in general. I love when people get lit up about something, and you were probably witnessing that all around you. And because it's a little bit of subculture and it's outside of the norm, you probably had a lot of people going like, what are you doing? But that almost somehow makes it a little bit more invigorating. You're like, we're living the way that we choose on our terms, and we're having fun while we're doing it.
Yeah, I was going to this prestigious art school, and then I started in kind of timing-wise around that summer, getting real serious about it. My parents had split up and gotten divorced right around then, so it was my financial aid situation got goofy, and if like I was taking school super seriously and I was doing well in school and I had a nice portfolio review and all this, and I could have pushed and gotten internships and this and that, and I could have continued down that path that I loved and enjoyed, but it's like I found something else that like took my heart, and it was like this was the thing that I had to do at this time. It was my chance to seize the opportunity and do it, and like school was always going to be there, and like we can talk about it later, but like now I'm well established in a career, I'm very successful and love it, but it's like that, it's something that I didn't have to destroy or ruin my life to pursue a passion that was outside the norm. There's no money in punk rock. The biggest bands in the world, the biggest hardcore bands, like 90% of them still work normal jobs, or they're living like very meagerly. Like very few people are making.
So they do it because they love it.
They do it because they love it. And I knew in my heart that it wasn't going to be like, this isn't my forever. I never had dreams of like, I'm going to be 40 and like playing in some 19-year-old kid's basement. But at the time it was like, I just had the opportunity. I was like, this is what I'm going to go with. This is what I'm going to do for now. And ended up not going back to school in the fall because I was pursuing that and pushing that. And, my parents were like, I mean, they had their own stuff going on. They were going through some hard times, but at the same time, they were like, what are you doing? You know, play punk music? You know, play hardcore metal or whatever you call it? And it was always that screaming shit. You're going to play that screaming shit when you're, your whole life? How are you going to pay the bills? And I had a whole smorgasbord of ways that I was paying the bills. It was pretty crazy life, but and with that, it wasn't just playing in the band. I moved out of my parents' house like about 2 days after my 18th birthday, and then I've never gone back and lived with them. So I've been entirely self-sufficient, and obviously my dad's a great guy, and he'll help us out even nowadays. He does HVAC, so like he'll put in a furnace and not charge us labor or whatever. So he's a very generous guy like that, and gives us good Christmas presents for our baby and stuff like that. But at the same time, I've been paid all my own bills, supported myself since I was 18, which isn't like something to brag about. It just should be the expectation. But at the same time, it's not always the case in today's world. So throughout that, it's not like I went off and did this punk rock thing, but then mooched off my parents. I was living that whole life. So yeah, like you mentioned, I lived. You were
fully immersed.
Oh yeah, lived on a front porch in Inkster, and we called it a punk house. So like, members of 4 different bands lived in the house in Inkster, and so we booked shows. We had shows in the basement, so people would come and tear apart our basement and mosh and jump off the walls and everything, break windows, and I lived on the front porch because I was the low man on the totem pole. So it was literally a front porch. Someone had like plywalled, no insulation, and cheap vinyl windows, and then we broke out the front door so I could walk back and forth. I had curtains over it, and it was half the size of this room was like my existence. Rent was it was like $120 or $160 a month, but I had it made because I was on food stamps. So I would go to the gas station in Inkster and take my $200 a month food stamp allotment. They would ring me up for $160 worth of bananas, and then just give me $160 in cash, and that was my rent. So then I was had to eat a little bit, so I would do graphic design, do T-shirts for bands or record layouts, work on their websites, so make a little bit of cash here and there. Played in Madden tournaments for money. I was apprenticing at a tattoo shop, sweeping the floors and getting, they'd throw me $20 at the end of the day or buy me a pizza, and that was enough. I got into some nefarious activities, make a couple bucks here, some things of questionable legality. Never drugs. I'm not a drug guy, but just trading in property that may not have been acquired and totally legally, and real stupid 18-year-old kid stuff, but never got into any serious trouble. And
just adventure,
lived the
man.
punk rock life.
And I know this answer before I even asked you, at least I think I did. You don't regret those times. Those times are important. They
Oh, no,
they
not
help
at all.
shape you, man. You
Yeah.
know, and it's crazy because of how multifaceted you are. You're going to an extremely prestigious art school, ranked number 2 in the world for some things. I mean, incredibly highly prestigious college education to pursue the arts. You're in a death metal punk band, touring around, hitting basements, sleeping on a porch. That's awesome. That's adventure. I like to hear that. So I want to talk for a second about you have a brother you grew up with, which is awesome. You have a brother. You're 6'9".
Yep.
How tall is your brother?
6'7"-ish.
Yeah, he's 6'7". You guys are gigantic human beings. So you have like a presence in the things you do. So I'm picturing in my mind this 6'9" man screaming on a microphone. I'm like, that is what I'm talking about. That's good energy. But what is your brother doing the time? And how does, you being the older brother, usually the younger brother kind of looks to the older brother to see how they navigate the world and how they're going through these experiences. So you're like adventuring, man.
Yeah.
You're living life. What is your relationship like with your brother at the time? Is it good? Is it bad? Do you guys see each other a lot? And then, what is Eric doing? And we'll get back on topic.
Yeah, Eric's my best friend in the entire world, and he always has been. We're 11 months apart, and then this is a whole nother subject, but we're actually adopted. So our biological mother and father, who had Eric and I, she was 14 when she had me, or when she was pregnant with me, 15 when she gave birth to me, 15 when she got pregnant with Eric, and then 16 when she had him. So I was given up for adoption. The woman, our biological mother, she didn't know she was pregnant until a very late term, and then gave birth to me. And then my parents, Bob and Yvonne, my mom and dad, who adopted us, they had lost a child when they were when in the late 80s, and that's a heartbreaking thing for people to go through. But they knew they wanted to be parents, so they went through the adoption process in Michigan. It was extremely difficult at the time. You had to do all sorts of auditions, and I have this album of pictures, which are their audition albums to be parents. So I love thinking about it sometimes, thinking like, were they trying to look more parently? Like, because they're, and I'm 29 now, so I imagine, they were in their early to mid 30s when they adopted us. So, I'm imagining now, like, how would I take a photo shoot with my wife trying to impress adoption agencies? So they went through that, got a call one day that, there's a young woman who's having a baby that she doesn't feel capable of caring for, and you want him? And they're like, yep. So basically at the time there were only closed adoptions. So basically there could be no contact between the biological parents and the adoptive parents. So I had to go to a foster home for 8 weeks, just 2 months when I was an infant. And I think my mom and dad were able to visit like frequently. So they were coming there, taking care of me in someone else's house, eventually got to take me home. And then when I was, 5 or 6 months old, my mom was at work or home. Yeah, my mom was at work, and she got a call from the adoption agency, and it was like a message. And I still have the piece of paper, but it was like one of those old school phone messages while you were out type thing. And it said, adoption agency called for Yvonne, return call as soon as possible. And she called my dad and said, Bob, they found out we're horrible parents. They're coming to take Steven away. And so he rushes home from work, and they're huddled up together, and they call, and the people said, well, Steven's going to have a brother in a couple months. Do you want him too? And I guess they just kind of looked at each other and didn't even discuss it. Yep. And they had only planned on having one kid, just me. So then Eric came home a few months later, and we've been together ever since. So I think that, that drew us closer together. I mean, also we just get along great, and he's my best friend, and we get along really well. But at the same time, growing up like that and having that kind of origin story really, enhanced our bond and our relationship. And we never felt other, but we always knew we were adopted, but it was never anything like we never felt lesser than or other than. Our parents said, hey, we love you more because you're adopted. We chose to love you. We didn't get stuck with you. You're not family by nature. You're family because we chose so. So that was something that was always very important to me, that, Eric and I were so close. And growing up, I keep referencing it, but we'll get to the Asperger stuff, I'm sure, eventually. But like, I was a very needy child, so I had a lot of issues socially, developmentally. So my parents required my parents to give me a lot of extra attention to help me become this productive, functioning member of society that I am today. So I worry sometimes, looking back on my childhood, that Eric somehow in some ways got not necessarily left to the side or left behind, because my parents always made sure to make him feel loved, and I'm sure he would say the same thing, but he almost got treated in some ways as an afterthought, and I hope as an adult he doesn't resent me for that, and he never did when we were kids, but like, you know, he had normal, he was neurotypical is the term for someone who doesn't have a neurodevelopmental disorder, like an Asperger's, an ADHD, ADD, pervasive developmental disorder, autism, any of a number of different types of disorders like that. So neurotypical is someone whose brain developed and functions typically. So Eric's neurotypical, and so he didn't require as much, but as a child, you still require love and attention from your parents. So, you know, maybe he kind of got the short end of the stick, but he turned out pretty all right. So he spent his childhood being my brother. We were hanging out. We played outside. I mean, I think we're probably the last generation. We'll harp on this, but played outside from sun up till sundown in the summer. We had a trampoline and lived in the woods, and you know, got into all sorts of mischief and trouble and broke a lot of things, and you know, hurt each other, hurt ourselves, and had a great childhood. We were both into sports. My dad's a big football fan, big Michigan fan, so of course we wanted to be like our dad, and loved that. We played football for a little bit, and then I got into wrestling when I was 8, and so I wrestled from 3rd grade through high school, and so that was an outlet for me. Eric wrestled in middle school and then into high school for a couple years in high school, and he liked it. It just wasn't necessarily like his thing where I like loved it. So, but he was big into sports. He's always been into cooking. I always thought he was going to end up being a chef because he's incredibly talented. Just one of those guys who can just put things together right in the kitchen, and and he's very like dedicated about that kind of stuff. Normal high school experience. He had friends, and you know, went through high school, and we were always just super close. And then after high school, he went through a little bit of finding himself too. He went to college right out of school, went to Wayne State, was going to kind of taking some nursing classes, maybe thought about being a nurse. He took some nursing type pre classes in high school at Brighton. They offer like a nursing assistant program where you can go to the hospital. So he did that, and then wasn't for him. He was another one where he supported himself completely independently from, you know, shortly after his 18th birthday. And there were times where he'd like go back and bunk with my parents for a little bit, but it was always, you know, living with friends in apartments and things like that. So he was always very independent, worked very hard, worked, you know, typical young adult jobs. For a while, many people don't know this, but he was going to be a train conductor. So he went into this program, moved to Minnesota and then South Dakota, was going through this training program for to be a train conductor. I wrote a song about it. My punk rock song is called Cedar Rapids, South Dakota, where he was living, about missing my brother and him having to go out and take his own journey, and me being understanding, as was one of my tributes to Eric. But he did that, and you know, that didn't work out, wasn't for him, which is good. Came back here, ended up getting a job, and he works at the University of Michigan now, Ross Business School. So he works in facilities and maintenance over there. He's a manager, and he has a whole team of janitorial and maintenance staff that work under him. And my dad's worked at the University of Michigan for almost 40 years and worked his way up, and now he's you know, one of the lead HVAC technicians for the university. And he actually designed and built the negative air pressure clean rooms that the university used to treat COVID patients. So my dad's, you know, done a lot with simple beginnings, and so I think Eric's kind of on that same path of just staying steady at U of M, increasing in responsibility. He's had multiple opportunities to run whole multi-million-dollar budget buildings, the engineering building and things like that, and so eventually he'll transition into one of those management roles. So Eric's had a crazy life, but maybe not as crazy as mine, but he's been there right alongside me the whole time. We've always been friends. We never go more than a couple days or a week without seeing each other. So
that's awesome to grow up with a best friend like that, especially like you said it best, with the same origin story.
Yeah.
You look at him and like you can always find solace in like, man, somebody at least to some degree understands what we're going through. We're coming up together. Like we're gonna make the best of this thing. I want to talk a little bit about an idea that came into my mind. Is a lot of that new music that was coming out shocked the older generations. I remember the first time I brought home a Slipknot album, and my cousin Shane gave me the Slipknot album when it came out. I was listening to Godsmack. I was listening to, you know, Pantera and Black Sabbath, and my parents were like, what is this? What is going on at first? And then my dad ended up becoming like a fan of Godsmack and other music. But you're on the furthest end, like death metal, hardcore, heavy. What were your parents' opinions on that? Were your parents, like a lot of the older generation, I'm going to cite my girlfriend's parents, for example. They listen to like the 50s and 60s music. Everything is like laid back, super chill. So I can imagine like the son just tearing up stages. What was that like for them? Did they, I'll end the question there. What was that like, witnessing their son being the front man in like a death metal band?
Oh, man, so my mom's like, she likes like In Excess and like, now she like Ed Sheeran or, just like soft, easy listening, 96.3 WDVD music. And my dad, it's funny because, his generation, they were like Beatles and Stones and stuff like that. And for him, that was probably a little too soft. I think like Aerosmith's one of his one of his preferred bands. Skinner he likes a lot. It's like classic rock, but the stuff with a little bit more of an edge. So I think he got it a little bit, just like, and he likes Sabbath and Deep Purple and Foghat and that type of like, a little bit heavier classic rock. So he kind of understood it. I mean, it was always, why are you wasting your time with this screaming shit? And then I think that was more just because I was blowing off other responsibilities or a more typical path in life. And but at the same time, they were always incredibly supportive. They would come to my shows, and so I'd be playing, and the local ones, we'd be playing at the Howell Opera House, and the place would be full with like, 14 to 22-year-olds, and they're moshing, swinging their arms and jumping on each other and screaming and this and that.
And your parents showed up to
They
that?
would just be in the back row, just like sitting there. And even after they split up and got divorced, they'd both be at the shows. I mean, they'd stand a little bit further apart after that, but
that's actually, I mean, that is really cool. That is a testament to those people. A lot of the times when parents don't understand something, they just distance themselves from it, or you get that slight condescending tone when they talk about it. They still showed up for you.
Oh yeah, they came to the shows and supported me, and it always made me feel like, hey, even if I'm not doing necessarily what they would do in this situation, they trust me and show respect and autonomy for like, what I'm choosing to do. And I'm not, I mean, I can't even remember, but I'm sure we got into some fights about I was wasting my time and this and that, and they didn't get the music, they didn't like it or whatever, but they supported me. They'd listen to my little demo tapes or my CDs or whatever, just when I'd show them, and wouldn't roll their eyes or anything. They'd take it real seriously and listen. Oh, sounds great, Stephen, you sound good. But yeah, I mean, they were very supportive, which made me feel, we could talk about it later, but like my whole life, the message from my parents, in spite of everything that they had been told about me, was you can do whatever you want to do, whatever you want to be, limitless possibilities. They believed in me. My mom, I mean, it's funny, my mom's silly, but she always thought I was going to be a pediatrician, just for whatever reason. She just decided my whole life that I was going to be a pediatrician. So it's like, and it's, I mean, going through medical school and stuff is obviously an accomplishment and a very lofty thing to ascribe to for a kid. But it's like, when I was 5 years old, it was never like, oh, you can be a firefighter or whatever. And as you grow up, you start to think like, oh yeah, that's what's required from these jobs. But for my mom, it's always, you're going to be a pediatrician or a scientist, like just a general scientist, which is even a job. But, they always had very high ambitions for me. So I always knew that I could do anything and felt that I could do anything because of that. And then I think the music stuff always just made me emphasize that, like, not only are they saying I can do anything, but when what I'm deciding I want to be at this moment is this front man of a hardcore band, then they're saying, yes, you can do that too.
There's a major shout out there to your parents, because there are a lot of kids in this world that do not get that try to go their own avenue that the parents don't understand. And man, then the rope around the neck gets tightened up. Hey, this is going to get taken away from you if you don't follow this way. You know what I mean? And it's great to hear. I want to talk further about the Asperger's thing, because it's something that, mental health is a massive topic in this country, whether it's, predispositions or things that you're innately born with, or even just the anxiety epidemic across the country. People struggle with their minds now more than I've ever seen, at least in my lifetime. When you were first told, when did you find out that you have Asperger's, that someone started to tell you, hey, you're different, the way that you're wired is different? How did that hit you initially? How did you begin to deal with that diagnosis? And then the man that sits here today uses it as a strength. Like, you don't even think of it as a bad thing. But let's talk about that process, because there's a lot of people that go through that probably don't come out the final, version the same way that you did.
Definitely. And that's something that I've witnessed hand in hand, because as a an Aspie is the term that people use for someone with Asperger's as an Aspie.
I actually haven't heard that.
Yes, that's a thing. So I have Asperger's and spent a lot of time with others with Asperger's, especially growing up as a kid. And it's not like I go to support groups now or anything, but when I was a kid, I did and went to classes and things like that. And so a lot of those people that were peers of mine at some point, now, you know, see on Facebook or whatever, they struggle. They're very limited in their function and their capacity for life. And I feel really bad because, you know, a lot of them started in the same place. They were born with a similar lot to me. And a lot of it, you know, you shouted out my parents, but a lot of it is, you know, how my parents raised me, the things that they taught me and the attitudes that they took with me. We can talk more about that later. But, you know, I feel bad because so many people didn't, you know, see that situation. Anytime I talk to like a parent of a young kid with some sort of developmental disorder, it's something that like really tugs on my heartstrings, and I just want to be like, it will be okay. It can be okay. I guess more importantly, like it can be okay. Like you can get through this. I've always dreamed of starting some sort of like foundation or speaking or whatever about just doing something to help kids, and more importantly, parents of kids with Asperger's know that like you can get through this. Because as a kid, it's a kind of a blinders thing. It's not something that's obvious. It's not a physical disability or deformity where someone looks at you and sees it. And I think that's in some ways makes it really challenging. So because people don't look at you and see that you're, you know, your brain is developed differently than others, so they have different expectations of you. So answer your question. Growing up. So Asperger's is a neurodevelopmental disorder. So it means it affects the way that your brain develops as you grow up, and it's something called a pervasive developmental disorder. So that means that it's characterized by a pattern of symptoms, or symptoms is a tricky word, but for all intents and purposes, symptoms, identifying factors. It's characterized by a pattern of symptoms as opposed to like one specific thing. So it makes it tricky to diagnose. Many of those symptoms occur early in childhood. So from the age of 2 on, I think people were noticing. So hallmarks of Asperger's or symptoms of Asperger's, people tend to be high functioning at a young age. They tend to be verbose, so they talk a lot, which is in contrast from autism, where people generally struggle with developing speech. So having an enhanced or unusual vocabulary for your age. One of the real hallmark symptoms is like intense or fixated interest, where like bordering on obsessions. It's not OCD where it's obsessing over flicking a doorknob or whatever, but like just having very, very intense interest. I've talked about that with people, and people say, oh, come on, all kids have intense interest. My son loves dinosaurs. It's so far beyond that. Someone who hasn't experienced it, I don't think could ever understand. I've had so many of those obsessions through my life. And like, for example, like pro wrestling, I'm still like pro wrestling, like, WWE fakey wrestling type stuff. And so when I was a kid, that became an interest of mine, and for a year, I couldn't have a conversation where we didn't talk about wrestling, no matter how inappropriate it was. It could be at a funeral. I'd start talking to the corpse about what Chris Jericho did on Raw last night. Like, it was like over the top. So that type of stuff, I think my parents noticed early. Difficulty empathizing with emotions, difficulty understanding nonverbal body language or nonverbal cues, social cues. It's difficult as someone with Asperger's, to relate to peers your own age. Making eye contact is really difficult, which is something that I've worked on and overcome. But for young kids, it's near impossible to look someone in the eye when you're talking to them. If you've got Asperger's, physical clumsiness, a high tolerance for pain, and an unawareness of your body, really poor proprioception, so the awareness of where your body is in space and how it relates to other objects in space. Those type of things, really poor fine motor skills. So just growing up, more and more of these signs become more and more apparent. As you mentioned, mental health is a big topic nowadays, and it's somewhat still taboo. I think some things it's difficult for people to discuss, especially the older generation. In the early to mid 90s, it was even more taboo. And so research around Asperger's syndrome and other autistic spectrum disorders was really becoming prevalent and at the forefront of the consciousness for doctors and for parents and stuff at the time. So it was being noticed. When I was about 8, my parents, I think, first took me in to get diagnosed, maybe 7 or 8, maybe a little bit earlier, but somewhere around there, early elementary, started noticing I was having difficulties and brought me in to get diagnosed. Luckily, the University of Michigan's so close, and they're a leader in that space, so I got a lot of treatment there. And so when I was 6-ish or 7, I was diagnosed with ADHD, ADD, and then an autistic spectrum disorder. So that's a category of disorders, and they didn't specify it as Asperger's until later. So they basically said, I'm 6 or whatever. There's something wrong with your kid. He's not figuring it out. So from then started getting some like cognitive behavioral therapies, like I would see a psychiatrist, I guess it was. Stuff with my parents, they would give them activities for things to work on for me to help me overcome some of those challenges that I faced. But then when I was...
What were the things, I don't want you to go keep going in depth in this, but what were the things that you do believe helped? Because I think there's a lot of unknown around it. And I mean, there's a gentleman that I'll talk about after you go into this name, Lucas. I won't say his last name because I don't know if he would want me to put this on here or not, but we trained him in our last building, and he had like a very strong case of Asperger's, couldn't look you in the eye at all. His father had basically come to me and say, like, listen, we've tried to put him everywhere. He got kicked out of Ohana Karate because he can't pay attention. Like, I really just want to try to give this kid something. And through martial arts and many other things in his life, he's completely turned stuff around. He was just in here the other day. I gave him a tour through the building, and I mean, he's killing it. He's in college. But he's actually incredibly intelligent too. Like, he is on a level of intelligence. One day, when I was trying to make him feel good, and I held a test for every single person in the gym to answer like trivia questions, right? Yeah. And I had them write down their answers, and then I put up the scores. Bobby would remember this. Lucas crushed everyone to a level that, like, I don't know if he got a single one wrong in random. Oh, yeah. So a lot of times I feel like people look down on people that have some sort of mental, if they're different, right? Okay, if they're different, Aspie, whatever you'd want to call it. Yeah. But really, I witnessed a young man that, although he had to learn social skills and he had to develop confidence and he had to learn the areas that he wasn't strong. Like, he wasn't strong at reading social cues. He wasn't strong at eye contact. But once he developed those, he was so much more intelligent than the average person that you come in contact with, that really it's not something that you have to look at as like a problem. It's just you need to work through different things than other people. And if you do, you can be far ahead of them. Like I said, he's one of the most intelligent people I know. He's incredibly smart. He retains information like you can't. On this day at this time, I'm like, what? So I think we have to change the conversation to people to, like, someone, if they are programmed differently than you, they may need to learn differently. They might need to work on different areas more than you, but it's not a disability. If you teach your child that, like, you're different and you'll always be less than, that is way more of a problem than going, you're different, we might have to focus in these areas, but then you'll be just as successful, if not more successful. Yeah. You know what I mean? We need to change the conversation. So what were the things that you think really did help you? And I know that's very young. Yeah. 6 and 7, you might not recall back, but throughout your progression into adulthood, what were the things that started you to not only get a handle on what you were dealing with, but start turning it into a strength like you've done today?
Yeah. So a lot of it's early intervention. It's parents being involved at a young age and actively working towards improving the situation and being understanding and educating themselves. And obviously, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a psychologist or neurological.
But you have life experience with this.
So, I can't give any like official answers or things that are backed by scientific, peer-reviewed study evidence. But just from my perspective, from what I've seen, for what worked with me, obviously may not work with everybody, but has also proven true for peers that I have. Early intervention, parents who are involved and proactive about it at a young age. There were things that were like acute therapies, I guess would be probably the medical term, and then there are things that were more about like environmental factors. So like responding to your child or the individual in question's individual like situation. There's certain acute therapies. So like I was super fidgety. I would always fidget and do this, I couldn't stop moving. And still I'm a high energy person, so I'll bounce my leg when I'm working or whatever, and it doesn't bother me. But when I was a kid, it was bad. I couldn't stop moving. Literally could not sit still. So it was little things like my mom, instead of having like a normal desk chair to sit on, she got me a yoga ball, because when you're sitting on a yoga ball, you're always constantly having to engage your core and your muscles and your legs to stay still. So that kind of alleviated that for me. I had an oral fixation. I was constantly putting things in my mouth that didn't belong in my mouth. I'd chew on pens and I'd blow up and I'd get ink all over my face.
I did that so much. I never knew why.
Just stupidity. And it was like, my mom would get me gum. And it's like something as simple as that, as like chewing on gum, or like they got me like rubber medical hoses and like, okay, it's appropriate to chew on these things when you're at home because they're safe, but you can't take those out in public because it's socially inappropriate. But here you can have gum when you go out in public. So there's those type of things of like overcoming individual obstacles, working with your kid. But to me, a lot of what helped me overcome a lot of those difficulties, and it was a long, gradual process, was the expectations that my parents set for me and the attitude that they have. I think I lucked out with having Eric, my brother, so close in age to me, because we were treated completely equally. So a lot of kids that I knew who were in this situation with me with Asperger's, even if they had siblings, they were always set off to the side and said, okay, you're special. I'm going to make this excuse for you. Getting in trouble in school, I had an IEP, or an individualized education plan, which is basically the school district, their psychologists and psychiatrists and experts and stuff like that coming together and saying, like, this person has some sort of developmental or cognitive delay. These are the things that we're going to allow for him to start, to help overcome those things, whether it's special needs classes, which Asperger's generally is characterized by average to above average intelligence. So people who have Asperger's aren't cognitively impaired, so they don't have any issues with intelligence, which is one of the things that differentiates Asperger's from autism. Autism generally people with autism are generally cognitively impaired. They're also speech is impaired, and then there are some physical symptoms as well. But I've always been smart, I guess. I've been told I was smart. My IQ was tested at a high age. I've been reading since I was 4. I'm a voracious reader. So, like those type of things. I've always been intelligent, and so my parents always set very high, lofty expectations for me. They fed my appetite for reading. I was reading literally like adult chapters, Stephen King books when I was 6 or 7 years old. I wasn't reading See Spot Run or Goosebumps or whatever. It was, I was given fodder to feed that, but also held to the same standards and expectations of Eric. So a lot of those kids with IEPs, there would be provisions set out where if they misbehaved, instead of getting detention or suspension or yelled at or whatever, it would be, you can go to the counselor's office and talk about what happened. I think for some people that those things are valuable tools, and I don't mean to discount them. But for me in particular, I needed to be held to the same standards that my peers were for it to sink into me that these behaviors are unacceptable. I acted horribly in school. I had no filter. I would say very inappropriate things. I had no awareness of social cues. I mentioned I'd pick my nose, I'd scratch my butt and sniff it and stuff, like when I was in middle school, and say things that were totally off the wall and inappropriate. I really struggled with reading nonverbal body cues. If I was approached a group of kids in the hall and they were all standing in a circle, and I would awkwardly wedge my way in there and start talking to them about wrestling or Apple computers or God knows what my obsession was at the time. And they would all turn their backs to me and exclude me from the group, saying, we don't want to talk to you. I wouldn't understand that, so I would just keep talking over them. I didn't understand when someone's doing this, like trying to jump in on the conversation because I'm talking too much, which I tend to do anyway, but I wouldn't get it. And so I would just keep talking. People would roll their eyes, and I wouldn't get it. Even like idiomatic expressions or metaphors, similes, those type of those type of language, I really struggled to understand. I remember an incident when I was young. My mom, I broke something or whatever, or did something, got in trouble. My mom was like, oh, you're going to pay for that. And I freaked out thinking, I don't have any money. How am I going to pay for that? And really she's just saying, you're going to be punished for that. But you're very literal.
Very literal.
Very literal. So those are all things that I just had to overcome. My mom didn't change her pattern of speech and start using only literal words, because I think she knew that the world around me wasn't going to make accommodations for me for the rest of my life. So
honestly, she probably helped you assimilate into normal society much better. You know what I mean? If she would have changed the rules for you, if you shelter your children from any type of failure, life's not gonna.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Life is going to show you what life is, and if you're not prepared for it, it's going to beat your ass.
Yeah. And there were kids who continued to have those excuses made for them all through high school, through college, and like, it's sad. Like, I know someone that I went to school with who was like my peer through school, and he is in the same place as he was when I met him when I was 11, and now he works in the produce section at Kroger in Brighton. And it's like, I don't say that to demean or
you just know the potential that exists because you guys were right side by side.
Yeah, and it bums me out. And I don't think he can drive a car, and doesn't probably lives with his parents, I imagine. I don't know him. I see him at Kroger every once in a while, but like it's sad. It's sad to me that because those excuses were made, or that expectation was put on him at a young age, it limited the way that he could see himself. Versus I saw myself, I guess, as a pediatrician, which I'm not, but it's funny. That was the expectation I had for myself. If Eric would have gotten in trouble for doing something, I got in trouble, the exact same punishment for the exact same thing. And my parents aren't superheroes. My mom, they're not doctors. They didn't do some 12-year research. They were young
learning
adults
as they go,
who had kids, and then they adopted this kid and he's got Asperger's, and so they just had to learn it. And so I guess I was lucky that they did that, and I don't know at the time if they read books, or I guess Yahoo was around. Maybe
your mom was intelligent enough to give you the ball to sit on. I mean, that's thinking outside the box instead of telling someone you have to do this. She said, okay, I'm gonna help him out a little bit with this. That's good thinking. That's someone that at least genuinely cares. I wonder if this will help, because no normal person would go, I'll just sit on a yoga ball. But you go, for my son, that might be good. He has an ability to constantly want to move. So the love was definitely there, and the belief pattern that they instilled in you, that like, hey, you can still be something in this world. We're going to hold you to the same standards as your brother. You don't get to be the kid that, well, Steven gets to get away with anything because he has a problem. No, Steven's still going to be his best. That's awesome, man. I hope I get to meet your parents at some point. That's very, very cool. We need more of that in society. And I think it's based in love. At the end of the day, if you love somebody and you care about them, you are going to try to help them improve. And you're going to have to, you'll have failures, you'll have setbacks, but you're on a mission. You're like, I'm going to help this person. You have to care about someone to do that. You know what I mean? That's one of the reasons not to take away from your story at all here, that's one of the reasons through parts of my life, I had depression, and I won't really go into a ton right now because it's your story, but I never got therapists. Because to me, although you may understand the mind and you might academically know why a person might feel a certain way, if you're not invested in me, if you don't know me, you don't like I'm a client to you. You understand?
Yep.
I never could establish that relationship because I would only open the door so much. You know what I mean? Versus when you have someone in your life that genuinely cares about you, that they don't have to say it, when someone really cares about you and they're trying to help you, that is how we can actually make real progress. You know what I mean? And that's why I always struggled with, and therapists might be great for some people. Therapy might be wonderful. But I always knew that you're a client sitting in front of a person versus like, man, I want my best friend to give me the advice because I know they care about me, or my father, you know what I mean? And you had that. So I feel like that foundation probably really helped you become the man that you are today, and you could have gone the other road. Steven could be the guy that was convinced by society and people around him that you should be working at a grocery store and just stocks and shelves, and you know what? Be happy about that. It's not your fault. You have a neurological disorder. It's not your fault, Just do your best, and mom and dad will take care of you. That could be a reality, and that probably terrifies you. You're like, oh my God.
Oh, yeah.
I could see it in your eyes when I was saying it. Like, that would be a horrible existence because you would have never reached potential.
Yeah.
And even before this podcast, you and I were speaking about how enjoyable it is to acquire skills. Yeah. Right at the start of the podcast, you said, if I'm going to do something in my house, I'm going to study the electrical. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, there is a joy in leveling up.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of people, I think, don't do that enough. And then they avoid, like, when something seems tough, you and I look at it as like, ooh, that's an opportunity to grow. Like, I can learn something from this person, this experience, this project. Whereas a lot of people go, I'm not good at that. I don't do that.
Yeah.
We need to like re-engineer that thought. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We need to teach children that like, you might not be good now, but who tells you that you can't be good later on at it?
Oh, yeah.
Some doctors might have looked at Steven and said, you know what? You're going to live at home with your parents, and you're going to work a minimum wage job. Maybe you'll move.
They did. I was, thinking about this podcast. I've got, old documents and paperwork and this and that. And I was looking because I was wondering, like, hey, I know this in the back of my head, but I was looking, what's the deal with this diagnosis? I have the paperwork from when I was diagnosed with Asperger's, and it was this guy, Robert Solomon. I'll never forget this guy's name because fuck you, Robert Solomon.
Robert Solomon. Listen to this podcast one day because you were wrong.
Dr. Robert Solomon. I don't know.
People need to remember that too. In this day and age, experts can be wrong, okay? We're going to tell a story about a doctor that tried to tell Steven that he didn't have potential. You're wrong, Robert Sullivan.
Yeah.
Solomon.
Yeah, he could be dead now. Rest in peace, Bobby. But he was a expert in the field of adolescent neuropsychology at U of M, and we went to see him, get me diagnosed, and this and that. And I have a vivid memory. It was like a 2-day testing thing where I had to go and I had to sit and fill out forms and I had to behave. They were observing my behavior and talking to my parents and this and that, so looking for the pattern of behavior to constitute Asperger's. I think I was either 8 or 9, and I remember sitting in this guy's office, and my mom was in there, my dad might have been there, but I think it was just my mom. I vividly remember her being there. And it's funny, the memories that stick with you when you're a kid, because like sometimes older people think, oh, you couldn't have remembered that, you're 9 years old, but like I can imagine where I'm sitting in the office, and I know it's one of those memories that I retain, not something that like my brain put together from hearing stories. Like I know it because I've consistently thought about it my whole life. I think about it, once a week, and when I was younger, much more often. But I was sitting there, and he's telling my mom that, we're diagnosing your son with Asperger's syndrome, and explaining the history and the pattern of behavior and the prognosis and basically a forecast for what's going to happen with my life. And he said, you need to prepare yourself to care for Stephen for the rest of his life. He'll likely never have a successful relationship. He won't get married, never have a job, likely live at home with you. When you guys are no longer able to take care of him, you likely have to put him in a home. And I could just see my mom's face. She's getting more and more pissed the whole time, walking out of there. And I think, my mom's a classy lady, so she was very polite and just said, okay, shook her head. I think maybe she was probably a little upset. And looking back on it as an adult, she probably scared her. But I remember vividly walking out of this, and it's at U of M, and I think we got Wendy's on the way out, a spicy chicken sandwich, which weird memory, but we get in the car, and the whole time her lips are pursed, and she's just all pissed off, and I can tell. And we get in the car, and she shuts the door, and I buckle up, and she just goes, "Fuck that guy." And I'm just like, I'd never heard her cuss like that ever, and I'm just like, oh my God. She goes, "Stephen, do not listen to a thing he said," because I was panicking. I was sitting over there like, this is an adult. This isn't a doctor.
I can't believe you were in the room. When I'm hearing the story,
I know,
why
right?
in the world, if you were going to say that, wouldn't you at least put the kid in the hallway and like, hey, buddy, blah, 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 good job today? You did that in front of the child?
Yeah. And I mean, I wasn't sitting at the table. It was a room like this. He had his desk with all his plaques and all his medals and all his awards and certificates saying how smart he was.
I'm the expert. I know what's best.
I was in the side of the room because part of the thing was like at different activities, put these blocks together, observe. So I'm over there goofing around or whatever, but I'm listening and I'm hearing it. And every time it's like a dagger. This guy's saying, you'll never have a relationship. You'll never have a real job. You'll never live on your own. And all of these things. And I started, I didn't know I was a kid, so I'm like, oh my God, is that true? Is he right? Terrified, panicked in my mind. I was just like, fuck that guy. And I was in shock that she said that, but there was like a beacon of hope. There was a little fire in my heart that was like, oh, I guess he's not totally right.
Because that's your mother who loves you, who just stood up and said, no, fuck that.
Yeah.
That's not you. But imagine the other kid. Yeah. Imagine a parallel universe that hears those words, and now in your psychology, every day you tell yourself, I'm never going to do these things. You just opened every door for failure and excuse for the rest of your life forever.
Forever.
And that was the expert at U of M. The guy.
Yeah.
He was the one. And yet your mother, through love and belief in her son, said, fuck that. And now we're sitting here as an example of fuck that. You know what I mean? Like, man, that is a powerful story. And I think that is an important story for many parents of children here. Because how many people remove all their power? Your mother did not. Remove all their power, and they sit down with an expert. And when that expert says, your child A, B, C, and D, they go, well, that's the future that we're going to live in. Yeah. Your mom didn't. Your mom said, nuh-uh, you're wrong.
Yeah, experts aren't infallible, and I'm not one to discount just because someone's an expert. I think that's a growing thing in the world today is like, this guy's an expert, let's not listen to him. I think you have to research people, because then after that, so my mom told me that is not true. We are not going to listen to this guy. And she probably doesn't even remember this. It's one car ride, when she's in her mid-30s. I can't imagine. She's 62 now. So like going through your life, like
I don't know.
I guess she was in her 40s, but it's something like, I mean, maybe she does, but like going through that, and she told me, no, that's not the case. And I remember from then on, it was like her mission to make that not happen. She sought out other experts. There's a wonderful lady named Sue Rubin, who was a big influence. She was like, I don't know what she did, some sort of counselor for Livingston Educational Service, LISA, which is basically they run any type of special ed for Brighton schools. And she, I think, helped my mom a lot. My mom got these support groups and infancy of the internet, scrolling around, looking around, but all these tactics like sitting on the yoga ball, and some of them we tried and we didn't do, like something like I could never like pay attention, so she had me put on like noise canceling headphones and listen to classical music, but like half on to try and pay attention. I don't even remember what she was trying to do at the time, but it didn't work.
She was trying, man.
Yeah,
she said, I'm going to figure it out.
Eric was pissed because I had a Discman, like a, with a Sony CD man to listen to my classical music and these big fancy noise canceling headphones. And we weren't wealthy, but she's probably spent $300 on these headphones at the time. These
like
Bose
a Walkman,
headphones.
bro.
Yeah. And it was like, she tried and she always held me accountable. So it's like, I always look back and like, being adopted and having Eric come with me is the greatest thing that's ever happened in my life, in so many butterfly effect ways. And it's because not only like am I with Eric, which is the best thing in my life, but also, I was lucky enough that my mom made that decision. And I don't even know if it was even a thought in her head to just reject this guy's opinion and never accept that as the truth. So she pushed through, and it was a struggle. And I'm sure there were times she felt like giving up, and maybe she didn't see progress in the moment, but like, it was a struggle for me. And I was looking at that this morning, and there's a paragraph in this document that says like, basically that Stephen will likely struggle with these issues for the rest of his life, and will be limited in his ability to gain gainful employment and this and that. And I wanted to just like find that guy and send like a selfie with my smoking hot wife in front of my awesome house, and like, I'll put my 20 jiu-jitsu medals around my neck just like to show this guy that I've succeeded at something in life, and stack of money, just like something to just be like, no, man, you're wrong.
Dude, Stephen, with this story, you are the perfect man to be going around and speaking to children that are going to be going through that situation.
Yeah, I'd love to.
That story, sitting here hearing it today, I am almost getting like teary-eyed because I feel the emotional feeling, because I for some reason I have this strong feeling to help people that don't feel like they don't see potential within themselves, whether it's because of cognitive issues or even people that like they have normal methods of thinking. Neurotypical. Yeah. But life has convinced them that they're not good enough. Someone told them they suck. Their environment was terrible. Their home life was horrific. They were bullied by some people, and they began to believe what they were being told. That for some reason just connects deeply with me, because we are human beings, and we generally are capable of what we believe ourselves to be capable of doing. Mm-hmm. Now, don't get me wrong, extreme cases of autism, things like that, there are things where there's limitations without question. Oh, yeah. But too often, people that live their lives well below what they're capable of is because of outside influence. And like hearing this story, man, Mama Mason, you are awesome. Like, you are the guy that should be going around speaking to children that are going to be in that same boat and telling them like, crush it. One day, stand up with martial arts medals in one hand, your beautiful family in the other, a great plot of land. I got donkeys and chickens, and I'm sitting here on a podcast having an articulate conversation, and I'm and eye contact, and everything that they told me that was going to be a problem for me, they were wrong.
Yep.
And you know what? And sometimes when people tell you can't do something in life, it's the best fuel. Oh, yeah. Mama got a chip on her shoulder and said, you know what? You think that of my son, you will be wrong. You know what I mean? And maybe, like you said, maybe just looking at mom, because those words cut deep, right? Like when you're hearing that, you're going, is that me? And just having mom go, nope, you don't listen to a word that person said. That probably created a different human being for the rest of your life experience than if mom would have got you in the car and said, it's okay, Stephen, like we'll make it work. You'll always have a spot at home.
Yep.
Man.
Yeah. And my mom, it's not my story to tell. You could have her on here, but my mom's lived she's had a much more difficult life than I have. My mom grew up in a very abusive, low-income home. She was kicked out at age 13 and was homeless on her own from the age of 13, living on the streets of Detroit and Ann Arbor. And she dealt with assault and abuse her whole life. Now she has and had to literally pull herself up by her bootstraps. And this is in the 60s, 70s, 80s. And she has 2 bachelor's degrees. She's a successful professional
I want to get your
career.
Mom on the podcast. I'm telling you right now.
Yeah, she's wonderful. And so she was in a position, and it's this cycle where people who have suffered in their lives, sometimes that cycle can go downwards. People who have been abuse others, whether it's, physically, sexually, emotionally, however that happens. there's a clear path for that to happen. You see it over and over again. People who are mass murderers is because their parents diddled them, and that's because his dad beat
Father
him.
was an
and
alcoholic,
their father was a drunk. It's this whole cycle. My mom took the path the other way. She always pushed me to have more than she had. And my dad, was the same way. My dad, we talked about my mom because she was a more vocal and involved, but my dad was the steady Eddie. He, he's worked at U of M for 40 years, like I mentioned, and he always worked so hard to care for us. He always had side businesses. He owns rental properties, does HVAC on the side, and he was the person that I always looked at because my mom, unfortunately, she's not perfect. I love my mom, but no one is.
No one is.
And so my mom, as a result of the trauma that she'd gone through her entire life, she struggled emotionally, I think, with sometimes, a little bit up and down with things, which is totally understood because of her circumstances. When you're a 10-year-old kid, though, you don't understand why mom's not, capable of relating emotionally today because she's dealing with her own trauma. So my dad was always that steady presence where I knew no matter what, my dad was coming home after work, food on the table, every practice, every sport, every activity, he was always there. I never felt at need or in need of anything my entire life. And, he's an old school blue collar guy. He's not super emotional, but he always had those moments that surprise you. And that nowadays he'll send me a text here and there saying he's proud of me and this and that. And those things mean so much because he's not the one to talk about emotions or feelings. So my whole life, he always just right when I needed it at the right time, if maybe my mom wasn't feeling too great or wasn't doing well, somehow miraculously just knew, just to say, Steven, you're all right. It's going to be okay. Stick with it. So, I had wonderful parents, and I'm so lucky. A lot of people aren't in that same position or as fortunate to have such supportive parents. So it worked out. I'm not one to brag about myself, but it also took a lot of determination on my part because there were a lot of times that I could have taken the easy way out when I was a kid. I could have blamed it on my Asperger's, and I think that my parents instilled that value in me to not make excuses and not place blame, but at the same time I had to uphold that value and I had to live that value. So when I was getting in trouble, I would never cop out and use Asperger's. I think as a kid you don't want to say that I'm different, and so you don't want to use that, but there were plenty of kids that I know that did. So it's tough, and I think it goes both ways, and they had to give me those values, but again I had to live them. So both my parents were incredibly helpful in that process, and then it's something that now as an adult, obviously I don't live with my parents, I talk to them often, but I don't see them. But even after the age of 18, it's not like all of a sudden I turned 18 and I was normal. It's something that I struggled with my whole life, and in some ways I hid it. I immersed myself in that subculture and surrounded myself. Hardcore and punk music's generally historically been very open to differences, whether it's sexuality or religion or race or whatever. Just people, it's a weirdo that attracts weirdos. So as an adult, I struggled a lot, especially early on. I was fortunate enough to meet my now wife when I was 19, playing in the punk band. I think she was enamored of this, punk rock lead singer type guy. But she had a really nice upbringing, and so I think she had higher expectations. So that's another situation where other people's expectations of me were higher than maybe my own were, and drove me to succeed. So she was happy when we were 19 and 20 that I was living on this porch of a punk house in Inkster and this and that. But I could always sense when we'd go over to parents' house, her mom was in a beautiful home and they're very successful. And so going over there, and her dad's the kindest, sweetest, most gentle man I know, and very emotionally aware. He's someone who worked retail his whole life and then ended up in his 50s going back to school and getting a degree in social work, and now he's a counselor for people with sexual addictions and things like that. So just so emotionally impressive, and I saw her surrounded by these people in her life, and I knew I had to aspire to be greater. So she wasn't going to be able to she was only going to put up with me living on a porch for so long. So she motivated me to do more and do better than the punk rock stuff, even though I loved it and that I wanted to do that. I had a close friend who passed away when we were 18. Actually, it was one of my closest friends. I've got a giant memorial tattoo for him on my stomach. But butterfly effect, at his funeral, ended up meeting one of his uncles who was the HR guy or sales manager at a mortgage company. So I'm 20 and I'm starting to realize, I think I was 20, that my Devin's this isn't going to be cool. Being punk when I'm 25, 30, 40 isn't going to be cool. So I need to like figure out some sort of path. And I didn't necessarily think that I wanted to go back to the graphic design thing. I took some computer science classes because I've always been a nerd with that kind of stuff. So I was like, let me figure it out. And I talked to Chuck, who was my friend Chris's uncle. And he's like, well, we're hiring mortgage sales guys. And I think he took a shot on me just because of that personal relationship. But I still had to interview with this guy, Robert Graham, who were doing this interview. Turns out he was in a punk band, Cold as Life, which is like a legendary Detroit hardcore band from the 80s. And he's in his 50s now, and he's a pretty straight-laced guy. But he was in a legendary punk band. So like I was able to make that connection there with him, got hired at the job, killed it, just worked so hard to provide this life for Devin. I remember my first time I got a commission check, and it was like $3,000 or something. It was like, I thought it was like the most money in the world, but I was like, I came home, and it's so cheesy thinking about now. And Devin and I, we weren't living together, but she'd stay over at my house because we were 21 and lived in I think in Detroit at that time maybe. And I came home with this $3,000 check, and I was like, Devin, we're never gonna want for anything ever again. We're always gonna be able to go out to eat and buy whatever we want. And obviously, it hasn't always been a straight path up there working commission sales. Like, oh man, I got my first big check. I had Devin had. Man, I think she wanted like a Michael Kors purse or whatever. And I was like trying to save some money and do this and buy her this nice purse. And there's this competition at work. And this was when I was doing the mortgages still. And they said, okay, it was March. It was Mortgage Madness instead of March Madness. So it was like a tournament where you had to get points for pulling people's credit and flipping loans. It was this whole thing. So it was this whole process, but I just busted it. And I was working 80-hour weeks and just working so hard to get her this purse. And that's all, because it was like a $500 prize at the end of it to get her this purse. And I was like, I'm going to get the $500 and you got Tigers tickets. So I was going to take my dad to the Tigers game. I was going to use the $500 to buy Devin a purse. And so I busted it. I won that. But as a result of all that hard work and looking back on it now that I'm in the business management world, like I understand that like, that was a motivational thing. It was never about the $500. It was about all the actions that you did at the top of the funnel that got points and then led you to win. I ended up with like a $16,000 commission check that month, and it was like the most money I'd ever seen. And like I was terrified to cash that check. I kept it in my like underwear drawer for like 2 weeks before I did anything with it. Like I was like, I can't do anything with it. What am I going to do with all this money? So I didn't even expect it. Like I just expected I'd win the $500 on the Tigers tickets, and then ended up, and that kind of kickstarted me to another level. I started again having higher expectations of myself. Oh, I can be a top producer. I was number one out of 83 loan officers at this month. Why can't I do that every month? The guy sitting next to me ended up going over and doing something different, moving into headhunting or recruiting. And so then he got me a job over there. He's an older guy, but took me under his wing. And then I've been in this recruiting talent acquisition world for 8 years now. And then my career has just advanced in that and gotten more on the corporate side. So it was a long journey, but a lot of that was triggered by having these expectations for myself that others placed on me that were higher than my own. Devin never said anything about it. My wife never said anything about it, but I could tell that the punk shit was going to get old for her. And so, I had to level up and do something better. And then, the mortgages, I was kind of getting by. I was kind of successful, but then, this competition had higher expectations for me. I was like, oh, I can perform at this level. So then I grew my expectations for myself and just continued that path my whole life.
To be honest, there's an incredible connect the dots thing in that story, which there probably is in everybody. It's Steve Jobs. Remember that speech where he said you can't connect the dots looking forward, you can only connect them looking backwards.
Yeah.
You seeking out that punk path that you found a connection with, where you found the ability to be unique and be yourself and be welcomed for that. Because I went pretty hard into like the gothic stage. That was like right before you was a gothic and like the big pants, and I had blue in my hair
Trip
and like
pants.
Yeah, exactly. But what it is you can be who you are and you're accepted of that without pressure. You don't have to meet norms of society. You don't have to conform to so many different things. You're just accepted as the human being. And then from there, you can like build a little sense of confidence that allows you to branch outward, right? Yeah. So with that being said, you just told a story of you chase that passion that a lot of parents might deter the kid from chasing, but that passion led to relationships. That relationship led to someone you were extremely close to. Now there was tragedy in the story. He passed away, but then you connected through somebody else as a part of the story that you would have never known had you not pursued your punk rock pathway. Yeah. Then you go to interview and you're thinking, oh my God, I'm the Aspie kid. I got this, but I got to interview for this big career. Yeah. because you had followed your passion in punk rock, you had a common ground.
Yeah.
You sat and talked to that gentleman. He saw something in you. He probably looked at a younger version of himself.
Oh, yeah.
And he went, you know what? Give this guy a chance. And that drastically altered the course of your life. And you could not have probably been there in that chair had you not pursued this passion.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. I recommended the book The Alchemist to you before this, but that's the idea that like more people need to realize is you just need to adventure. You need to explore. You need to be passionate and take in life experience and learn to be genuine and love people and care for things. And life just has a way of like making it work out. You know what I mean? If you look to the future, if the young kid sleeping on the porch doing punk rock goes, how am I going to get a $16,000 commission check one day? There's depression because you're never going to see the path. You're not going to see how am I going to get there? But if you just live and you do your best and you evolve as you go through time, those things can work out. That's an awesome story, man.
Oh, it was inconceivable to me. And the punk rock, it's funny, the punk rock breadcrumbs keep going. So I went into the mortgages, and that's like hardcore commission sales. Like you're making 500 calls a day, you're getting hung up on and cussed out, but there's some good money in there if you stick with it. There's been a lot of regulations and stuff, so it's kind of gotten more difficult, but it's still like you hustle, you got to make your money. Then I got into what's called third party or agency recruiting. So I was a headhunter. So I worked for this independent company up in Clarkston, where it was eat what you kill. So you would have to go out and get clients, automotive companies, manufacturing, engineering companies, and they would say, okay, this is the hardest job that we have to fill. Our internal guys can't do it. We've had it open 6 months. We have 10 interviews. They're all horrible. Here, this is the hardest job. You fill it, and we'll pay you if and only if you hire the guy. So then you're sitting there eating what you kill. And so those type of jobs.
How are you paid in commission for that? Like based on the level of the salary of the person you attain, or like
so it's a percentage of the salary of the person that you put their first year salary, and then it's a lump sum. So there's two sides. That's called direct hire or contingent recruiting, where you place a guy one off, they pay you a fee, they're hired by the company. Then there's also something called contract staffing. Like I think Cody Brundage used to do that for a little bit when he first got into. I think first moved here, where it's, you're basically hiring people. It's more like hourly temp staff where they're working for your company, but your company's billing them out. So like you'll hire, assemblers for a manufacturing plant, and you're paying them $15 an hour, and then you're charging Ford or whoever $30 an hour, and you make profit on the margin. So I was on the contingent recruiting side. So big placements where I was making big money, and but it was few and far between, and you could have down periods. So, but through all of that, I didn't finish my college degree because I went to go do the punk stuff. And always in the back of my head as I entered the professional world, I knew there was going to be a limiting opportunity for me in some point. And I always felt the pressure and need to like work harder than everyone else because I don't have that degree to fall back on. And someone could use that as an excuse. If they didn't like me, or if I didn't work hard enough, or I wasn't doing a good enough job, they're not going to hire me or promote me or something. And they'll use that as an artificial excuse, even though today's world is getting more accepting about that. I never had that degree to fall back on. So in the commission side of things, it didn't matter because you eat what you kill. So as long as I'm doing great and succeeding, it was fine. I made a big jump. Almost 2.5 years ago, my daughter was born, and I had been at the agency for about 5 years, and I was doing well. I was never, without getting, it's not a job interview, so there were certain limiting factors where I not necessarily wasn't like the top guy, but I was doing well. And it was good, but it was feast or famine. So I would have a $30,000 check, and then I would go 3 months without a check. So it's hard to live like that when you have a kid. It's fine when you're 22 or whatever, but when I had a kid, it scared me a little bit. Because even though I was good with my money, and on those feast months, I'd put that away and then make sure to spread it out. It's tough to not have that steady income to rely on. So I started looking at some corporate opportunities, which is where you work in-house at a company, hiring people to work at that company. So what traditionally people think of as like HR or internal recruiting. So I did that. So I wanted to get into that. I had the idea, and I ended up getting in touch with this a woman who worked at the company that I work at now, and she's over in Paris, and she's this Romanian lady. And I was always scared, like, hey, I don't have a degree. There's no degree on my resume. When is it going to come up? And so I always had to just prove myself. And then throughout the interview, met with her, and then went to Ann Arbor, met with the people in my office for this job, and then ended up my final interview. I find out that the final decision maker is this guy who's the TA manager for the Americas. He's this guy, I looked him up on Amazon or on LinkedIn, and it turns out he worked at Apple for a long time, and he was like this. He's at Facebook, and he's this hot at Amazon. He's this hot shot, and so I'm like, oh man, he's this typical Silicon Valley guy. I didn't see a degree on there, but I'm like, oh, assuming this guy's got a degree. He's been in recruiting for 30 years, and he's working at these top prestigious companies. I knew I had to interview him, so then I start Googling him, find his Facebook, this and that. Because when you're a recruiter, that's what you do. You start doing background research on people. Find out he was in a punk band in the 70s in friggin' Sunnyvale, Palo Alto, California in the 70s and 80s. And so I'm just like, all right, I got to find a way to slip this into the interview. So when he asked me about my journey to where I got to this point in my career, I made sure to slip in, hey, I played up in a punk band. And then even though I knew that he was in a punk band, you got to play it cool. And he's like, really? I was too. So then we connected and bonded over that. And I was qualified for the job, and I'm successful in it, and I've killed it. I've been promoted a few times. Now I'm leading talent acquisition for the Americas, and I've got people work for me and this and that. So it's like I've grown, and I proved myself. And it's not that I didn't deserve the job or I got a nepotism or anything like that, but the fact that we made that connection maybe overcame the fact that I didn't have a degree, or just made it a little bit easier for him to overlook, or made me a little bit stronger. But it's like I was able to bring that up. And it's funny because we go back to turning weaknesses into strengths. Social interaction is very difficult for someone with Asperger's. It's the crux of it, is it's very difficult to interact socially with your peers, with others. Recruiting, talent acquisition, what I do is all about social interaction. I interview people all day. I find out what's making them tick, their motivations for a job. I do compensation negotiation. I do talent management, talent development, where I'm helping people grow in their career as leaders. And all that type of stuff is stuff that as an Aspie does not come naturally to me in any way. You would think it would be impossible for me to do, but because of my mom, when I was a middle schooler, would give me books about business relationships and this and that, and tell me to read it in hopes that it would help me maybe understand that you can't scratch your butt and sniff your finger in class while everyone's looking at you, and you can't talk about weird, inappropriate stuff when you're a kid, overcompensating, proactively going out and learning about social dynamics and relationships and motivations and things like that has given me a leg up in my career now that as an Aspie you would think would be impossible. So
it's an incredible story, man. Yeah. You need to get this story out to way more people that are going to go through that same journey. There's a lot of 6-year-old kids that might just be coming out of an office with their mom, and their pathway in life is uncertain. They don't know what's going to be next, and they need to hear things like this because it gives you hope. Just the idea, like I used to use the word possible all the time for myself. Like when me, Brian, Juan, and Joe Adkins were training in my basement, I just always talked about that it was possible that one day I was going to be a pro. It was possible one day we would own a mega facility. It was possible one day UFC fighters might even visit Brighton. It was like delusional, to be honest. But man, things are possible, and you got to live in that potential. You know what I mean? And hearing this story, it just keeps getting better as you tell me more stages of it, because you keep climbing tiers of adversity that most people would stop. I feel like most people, if there was a massive mountain ahead of them, as soon as they got to a plateau with a good enough view, they're just going to kind of look out and go, all right, this is good. I made it far. For an Aspie, I'm doing great. Yeah. This is awesome. You've continually not accepted anything but like, I can do better. I can do better. I can do better. It's almost become like a pursuit for you to find out how far you can go. One thing where does that come from?
I think it's having the expectations that people have set for me. And now my motivation is my wife and my daughter. It's about constantly improving. And it's also something innate in me that I'm never satisfied, never settled. There's a deep uncomfortability with good enough. So I'm always just like focused on improving, getting better, and in everything that I do. And it's why I love martial arts, why I love Jiu Jitsu so much.
It sounds like you've kind of revealed a secret that like the people in your life holding you to a high standard are incredibly important. Because if you if you don't have those people, you don't have the people pushing you when you don't want to be pushed, when you're going, no, I'm comfortable right here, I have this issue, and they're like, nah, you're going to get more. You need that.
Oh yeah. Still I struggle with Asperger's stuff. Even it's more subtle, it's more intricate inside stuff. It's not about looking at someone in the eye. It's about understanding emotions and relationships. Me and my wife yesterday got into it because, you know, she holds me to a higher standard. She holds me to the standard that she wants in a partner. She wants someone to treat her how she would want to be treated and this and that. So, you know, like I struggle because, you know, sometimes emotionally I still have some characteristics of Asperger's, like, and it's not, people mistaken think it's a sociopathy thing where it's like you don't have emotions, but it's with Asperger's, it's like, your emotions are more logical than they are emotional, which is tricky for people. My wife's very emotional and she's very emotionally intuitive. There's that, like, you know, people say empath, like it's like mystical thing, but like when you look at it, it's like, oh, that's Devin. Like she's very emotionally intuitive, incredibly so, which makes her a good counterpart for me, but she holds me accountable to those standards. Yesterday, I don't even know, we were like hanging out and taking care of our daughter, and I like walked away to do something. I think I was like, I don't know, changing my pants or something, and then I just got distracted, and I went to the bathroom, and then went upstairs, and then I was looking, we were getting our house painted, and I was looking at there and seeing what he did, and I was tooting around on my phone, goofing around for a little bit. I just basically disappeared for like 15 minutes, and for me, like, to me, in my logical brain, I'm thinking like, why does it matter what I'm doing? She doesn't need me right now. If she needs me, she can call my name and this and that. But to her, and to me, to her, she wants to know where I'm at. She wants to know what I'm doing. She doesn't care that I disappear for 20 minutes, but she just wants the heads up. Like, we're in the middle of playing with our daughter, and I just got up and walked away. And in my stunted emotional Aspie brain, I'm thinking like, well, why does it matter? She can just speak out loud when she wants me. And if she does, and then in my brain, it turned into a trusting. Well, what does she think I am doing? If she does not know where I am.
It's funny because I'm programmed like that so bad. Like, dude, I am all logic, and like I sometimes only experience the emotion because I logically understand why the emotion would be there.
I should be happy here. This is the thing that makes me happy.
Honestly, and I've struggled with that really hard my whole life. And as I've gotten older, I think I've gotten better at it because like you describing that situation is the identical Stacy and I.
Yeah.
Like she is all emotions and how things feel, and like if 1 and 1 doesn't equal 2, I have a very hard time making the connection, except logically. Like now I can look back and understand why she feels this way or why I should have thought of this, but I don't do it intuitively. It doesn't come to me naturally. What you were describing is me to a T, man.
And for someone with Asperger's, it's like the pathways in your brain are not wired to even understand that if someone explains it to you. Even if someone explained it to me, naturally it doesn't occur to me. So I have to work so hard to do that, and you know, it's
you have to really leverage that intelligence to like constantly beat on that craft because it does not come natural to you.
It's got to be so incredibly frustrating for my wife, but she has consistently held me to the higher standard. And sometimes, even though I didn't do it when I was a kid, sometimes I get so frustrated now. And I'm like, it's because I have Asperger's. You're picking on me because I'm autistic and this and that. And that, I know she doesn't because she's very, you know, understanding and well-meaning, but there's certain things that she just does not let me use my Asperger's as an excuse. And so I don't know. People say you marry people like your mom, and you know, she's very unlike my mom in so many ways. They're very different, but in some ways that like accountability, that holding me to a higher standard, they both have. And I'm lucky, I'll be with my wife for the rest of my life, so I'm lucky that I've got her holding me accountable, and it's a constant growth, continual growth, like anything.
And it's like medicine.
Never
you might not want it, but man, it's good for you.
Oh yeah,
it is good to be held to standards. It's good to be held accountable.
Sucks, though. It sucks 100%. Though when she's, you know, I feel like she's ragging on me for something, and it's like, I don't even understand why you're mad about this. But you know, and even now as an adult, I'll read books that help me understand the dynamics of relationships and as it relates to marriage. And we're incredibly healthy marriage and happy and things like that. But it's work, it's progress, and so.
And that's what life's supposed to be, man. It's that skill acquisition. That's an area you're not as strong. You got to work to acquire it. And like you said, it's a good medicine for a lot of people. A lot of people, if they have people in their lives that love them and care about them, that hold them to standards, and they know. You might not know because you're wired differently than a regular person, but most people, when they're slacking off, they know that they are subpar. They know that they are not giving their best. They know that the effort that they're putting out is well below what they should be doing. And then when people say that, it's more of like, like you're addressing the thing that they don't want to address. You know what I mean? Whereas you might be blind to it. Yeah. You might be like just off in your own world, doing project to project, and your wife's like, what the? You know, but we need more people in our life that hold us to those standards, that just care. Because what it is you care about them.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Because if she didn't give a shit about you, go do whatever you want. I'll do whatever I want. I don't care. You know what I mean? But you have a loving family and a relationship because you two do, that bond is there.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, just the thing to take away from me is like, even if you don't have Asperger's, you don't have someone in your life with Asperger's or any sort of neurodevelopmental disorder, the thing for me to take away is like, everyone has someone in their life that they love and care about, and instead of thinking of it as like me speaking as the recipient of this support and expectations, think of yourself as the giver. So anyone who has someone in their life, whether it's a child, a partner, a friend, the parent, anyone, hold your friends and your loved ones to high expectations. Do it in a kind and loving and supportive way. And they'll surprise you. They'll surprise themselves with the heights that they can reach. Just hold the people that you care about to high standards. Hold them accountable. Talk to them, but be understanding and understand that everyone's different and everyone has different limitations. They might have to sit on a yoga ball, but it's something
that kind of comes to the epitome of tough love. That's what the essence of tough love is. When you love someone, sometimes you got to make them uncomfortable.
Yep.
You gotta have conversations you don't want to have. You gotta communicate in ways that it would be so much easier to avoid.
Yeah.
But the progress is worth it.
Tough love is still love. It's all love,
100%,
baby.
man.
Gotta give the love. It's all about love.
My Aunt Di beat a saying into my head. I've said this on other podcasts over and over as a child that never fully clicked with me, but I think it's a large part of who I am and why I am the way I am today. Is she always recited this stupid sentence that it's all about the love. And she would say it to me so much when I was a kid, and I never really got it. I was like, whatever, Aunt Di, you're weird. Sure, it's all about the love. But she would beat in my head, like, you need to find something in this life that you love for work. You need to find a relationship that brings you love. Everything you do needs to be based in love. And if you can find a way to do that, you're going to live a very successful life. And like when you're a little kid, it's all about the love. It's like, yeah, sure it is, Aunt Di. But over and over, and through her example, like I witnessed her marry her high school sweetheart or college sweetheart. They met in college, and they're still together to this day. Beautiful family, 5 children. And she was probably one of the most influential people to me of my entire life. And she just preached that simple of an ideology. She just pushed on you that like it is about love and life. You got to care for people. You got to care about what you do. You got to care about who you are. You got to care about the way that, you go through this experience, because who knows if there's a chapter 2 or if it's the end of the game. You know what I mean? So one other topic that I do want to get into is wrestling, because martial arts is a very internal journey. Like a lot of people get into martial arts because they got bullied and they were like, I'm not going to let that happen again. I'm going to beat someone up. But then what you find through the martial arts is it's this incredible inner journey to the inner workings of your psychology and your mind. And you're on this constant quest to battle with adversity and all these things in pursuit of a better version of yourself, right? Most people that have never stepped on a mat, or at least haven't stayed consistent enough, will never understand fully the topic that we're going to talk about. But as a person with Asperger's, I'm picturing the kid who at one point was told you might not be anything, gets into one of the most difficult sports on earth. Wrestling makes killers. Mm-hmm. Wrestling, there's not forgiveness in that. You're going to bounce your head off the ground. Someone's going to try to strangle you. Not in wrestling, they're not trying to strangle you, but they're trying to hold you down against your will, which is incredibly frustrating. It's incredibly, mentally taxing to people, but yet you stuck with it. What got you to go into a wrestling mat or onto the wrestling mat the first time? Why did you stick with it? And then how do you believe martial arts influenced your progression? As a child, was it only super small in the mental progression, or do you think it played a larger role? And now, later in life, what role do you think martial arts has played in changing your psychology?
Yeah, so, and I've got a hardish stop in like 10-ish minutes.
No problem. We'll wrap it up with this.
Get my kid up for my nap.
I'll be honest, though. I think I want to do a part 2, man.
Yeah, we can always can.
Really enjoy this.
But wrestling, so I got into wrestling because my... I just had a friend who was into wrestling, and I liked pro wrestling, so I was like, I'll go to learn to do moonsaults and stuff. So went in, and obviously it wasn't pro wrestling. I figured that out pretty quick.
No frog splash and all that stuff.
No, nothing like that. So figured it out and got into wrestling. I was 8, and so Brighton Wrestling Club is run by this guy named Chris Collins. I don't know if you ever run into him. You'll see him at any youth tournament. I'm sure Buddy knows him, and a lot of those guys. He wears he probably still does, but he's got a thick red mustache, and he's got a Michigan hat with like a winged helmet on it. So he's like a legend. So he was like the youth wrestling coach, and he was great. And I was a kid, so I didn't take it very seriously. I was really distracted. I liked it, and it was just something I kind of did, and I was okay at it. And then in high school, it kind of sucked because we had a at the time there was like some rule where the actual coach had to be a teacher. So it was like some guy who wrestled like 1 year in high school was the coach, and he was not understanding at all that, like, you know, so he was the psychology teacher, and I think he knew that I had Asperger, so maybe he fancied himself an amateur psychologist or whatever. So he would always single me out and treat me different and let me make excuses for my behavior. So he wasn't a great influence. But then here and there, you know, Sam Amin, a legend in wrestling in Michigan in the Midwest, he would come in and, like, I don't know, assistant coach, or he'd run practices sometimes. He could never be our official coach. But when he was there, oh man, he held me to and maybe it's because he didn't know me or just who he is, but he cracked me into shape. And any time that I was, you know, goofing off, he would make me run laps or do push-ups or, you know, have people sprawl on me or cross-face me or whatever. So, you know, the rare occasions that he was there, he made a big difference in how I looked at it, and he was the one. Wrestling, it's funny, goes through cycles. Like, I think in the 50s and 60s, it was like really serious. It was the cool thing to do. But like when I was a kid, it was not the cool thing to do, and no one was serious. Like, no one cut weight at Brighton. It wasn't very serious. We were middle of the road. I mean, we'd beat everyone but like Heartland and Rockford and CC and Corona, Owasso, Davison. Those good schools, they'd beat us, but we were, you know, top quarter of the pack. But no one took it like super seriously like they do now, probably because obviously MMA, but even more like the internet and social media and stuff like that. So, I mean, I loved wrestling, and you know, just I liked getting the energy out in the sport, and it was stuff like that. But I don't think I necessarily had great influences in wrestling that led me to change my life because of it. It was just something that I did. But then now looking back on it, I've always been a UFC fan since the beginning. Me and Eric watched after Raw, the first season of The Ultimate Fighter. Forrest Griffin and Stephan Bonner got real into UFC from there. Followed it our whole, you know, maybe we were 10 or 11 or something when that happened. So then followed it growing up the whole time. And then so knew Jiu Jitsu and, you know, striking. I was never necessarily excited about doing striking, whatever. And then always wanted to do Jiu Jitsu. And then when my daughter was born, I was like, okay, I'm going to pick one thing that's for myself that I'm going to do. And just like, it's my fitness, it's my hobby, it's everything. So I started doing Jiu Jitsu 3 years ago now, 3-ish. And then, you know, obviously came here and trained at another gym for a few months, came here, and then, you know, it's been a big part of my life now. And I think it's something that one of my advantages with Asperger's is I have the ability to comprehend and retain large amounts of information rapidly and disseminate that information. It's something that you remarked about your, you know, someone else that you knew in the same situation. So Jiu-Jitsu I've been able to study, and I think my knowledge exceeds my experience. And, you know, I run the morning program, the morning classes now just through happenstance. Jason, one of your other recent podcast guests, was running morning classes, and he's got hurt. So you know, I've been doing that for 6 months-ish now, and love it, even though I'm not necessarily the most experienced, the most knowledgeable. I'm not a pro fighter or anything like that. It's something that teaching always makes you better at things. So.
And the morning group's been growing. I've had more people asking about it. I've had more people asking at night, and I keep telling them, hey, we have 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. We have both sessions.
Yep.
So I hope we get to the point where we have 40 people at 6 a.m. and we have 40 people in the evenings, you know what I mean? And it's everybody in the community is doing jiu-jitsu together. It's good for everyone. But man, I don't want to make you late for getting your daughter up, but this was a stellar podcast. We did an hour and a half.
So much fun.
Effortlessly. We're going to do a part 2 because it's awesome. There's still tons of stuff I want to talk about. And then we really need to come up with a plan on because I've worked with the court kids for years. I mean, for over 5 years. There's got to be a way we can get that story is powerful, man. And I want people in this building that want to help other people. We gotta leverage together and use a platform. Yeah. You know what I mean? A lot of people follow us. A lot of people see what we're doing in the community because it's outside of the curve, right? Yeah. And more than ever over May, we won't go. But with people following us, we have the potential to make serious change in a good direction. And I want to be a part of that. I'm sure you want to be a part of that. So we'll wrap this thing up now. But Steven, truly a pleasure today, brother.
It was very fun. We'll talk again soon, and we can do a uncensored version where I can tell some crazy road stories from the punk rock days.
All mine are uncensored, man. My podcast, it's whatever you want to say.
Sounds good.
All right, brother.